everyone, and welcome to this evening's presentation. We are so excited to have you joining us here online as the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire tries out a new format yet again for our Global Tipping Points series. My name is Tim Horgan. I'm the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, and we are so excited to get started here tonight to talk about some business perspectives from New Hampshire businesses on the global supply chain. We have two great businesses here. I'll introduce them in a moment, but you are going to be really excited and really interested to hear what they have to say on some of the challenges and some of the solutions that they are seeing. A little bit about the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization, and so we rely on the support and assistance of our wonderful sponsors, members, donors, and supporters. If you are not yet a member, you can see some of our wonderful member benefits right here behind me. But we do hope that you consider joining and supporting our work here if you enjoy tonight's program. We want to help people better understand these complex global issues, and we do that through bringing expert speakers to the state for these types of discussions and conversations. We are also a nonpartisan organization, and therefore we do not take any stances on policy, politics, parties, people, candidates, etc. We are the platform for discussion, and we hope that you take the information that you learn here tonight and at all of our events to formulate your own opinions and insights into these global issues. I want to take a moment and thank our wonderful sponsors and partners for all of their help in getting this program off the ground. To Southern New Hampshire University, our mission partner who helps with all of our programs, gives us our wonderful space in which we're here tonight, broadcasting live to you. We also partnered with a number of organizations, including New Hampshire Business Review, the New Hampshire Tech Alliance, the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce, the New Hampshire Business and Industry Association, and the Small Business Development Corporation. We really thank them for all of their help in getting our wonderful audiences together to talk about this important issue that is affecting us all. We wanted to go over how you can ask your questions here tonight. If you're watching on our website, we have a YouTube chat function, which is right below you. You can scroll down and enter your questions there. You can also email us at council@wacnh.org. If you're watching on Facebook, you can enter your questions right into the chat there. We will get through as many questions as we can here tonight. We always have such wonderful questions, and we really appreciate your interest in these topics. Okay, enough about me. I want to introduce our two wonderful speakers here tonight. First, Cara Burzynski, President of AeroDynamics and Revolution Scientific, which is a family-owned business in Seabrook, New Hampshire. She spent 25 years in the nursing career, which my wife is part of these days, in clinical research, and made a transition to aerospace manufacturing. I'm sure a very easy transition for her. Her background in nursing gives her a unique perspective into quality, systems management, and compliance. AeroDynamics is a metal finishing company that serves the aerospace, defense, and medical industries. We also have Brandon Stover. He's the president of SVT Supply Chain Solutions in Hampton, New Hampshire. Been with them since 2007, to the best of his recollection anyway. Yes. They are a collaborator that works to ensure the success of businesses in the ever-evolving supply chain landscape, which over the past two events and here tonight as well, I'm sure we will hear there is a lot changing, a lot going on, and a lot of things to think about and to manage. SVT offers us a wide range of services encompassing major segments of the supply chain and is capable of addressing the full product life cycle from cradle to grave. They serve multiple industries, including semiconductors, which of course is a huge issue these days. Lots of challenges getting enough of those for anything from cars to toasters, it seems. Everything has a semiconductor in it. So I want to thank you all for joining us here tonight. I want to thank Cara and Brendan for joining us as well, and I'll turn it over to you for your remarks.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tim.
So I just want to say that, I'm really grateful to be here and excited to have Brendan alongside to be able to talk global tipping points and just the supply chain issues that we're all facing in business today, but specifically not just the problems, but some of the ways that you can strategize to help ease some of the burden that we're all facing. So, as far as just going over in broad terms, supply chain disruption and factors that have contributed to them, I think that we should just maybe go back and forth talking a little bit about what we see as factors that are contributing to the supply chain disruption.
Absolutely agree. Thanks, Cara. Yeah, and obviously thank you for Tim for having me as well. What's interesting about supply chain, as I made a joke when I first sat down, was who doesn't like talking about supply chain? Well, what's interesting is you could have asked certain people, whether it's your neighbors or individuals, anything about supply chain, and they might have started to fall asleep or looked at you with an inquisitive look. Well, now more and more people are understanding the issue of supply chain, and they hear supply chain, and they're starting to understand what individuals like ourselves do on a
Sure.
daily basis to make those things run a little bit smoother, or make those products end up at your house at the right time, or along those lines. So, for an individual like myself in this business for such a long time, now that it's on the forefront, now people actually want to talk to me and have more conversations about it. So it is very interesting. So I'm happy to be here and share those with you.
Sure. Some of the factors that have affected AeroDynamics are just basic material shortages, and the difference in material shortages from 2020 until now has completely changed. And I tell a story, and I've told it quite a few times, of something that we never thought would be a problem, but we work with wooden Q-tips a lot in the metal finishing industry to get into small areas, and those Q-tips are now used for COVID testing.
With a wood shortage.
Yes. so those Q-tips that, and I'm calling them Q-tips, that's the brand name. They're not Q-tips. They're wooden tips with a cotton swab at the end, and those we've had to improvise. Those are actually gone from the market. What happened was we were buying them in bulk with 1,000 pieces, in just a box, where now they're selling them sterilized. And so what was basically a commodity that we were buying for pennies, they're now selling for nickels and dimes. And so they're out of the business selling them wholesale, unsterilized.
Absolutely.
And it only makes sense for them. This was an opportunity for these swab manufacturers, and they've had to grab their opportunity, but that leaves us in a bind where we had to improvise. So that's
exactly right.
One example of something really small that happened very quickly to us, but it impacted our business in a way that we had to maneuver around it.
Exactly, and those are some of the things that we help support companies with the supply chain, is that finding that alternative supply, or finding an alternative source for whether it's the cotton part or the wood part.
Sure.
But that also lends itself to counterfeiters that you may see out there, where some of you might have seen, or some of you here remember the masks, the N95 masks, and
Yes.
there was a shortage on masks and we couldn't get them, and then all of a sudden there was a overage in excess of masks because so much came flooded into the market at the time, and more manufacturers started making them, more companies started making them. So adapting to those types of issues and shortages. Now, of course, in terms of semiconductors, that's a little bit more difficult.
Right.
You can't just go into your backyard, or they may get there at some point where you're making semiconductors with 3D printers, but you can't necessarily do those kind of things
Right.
now. So that's where you need to start planning ahead, right?
Sure.
Which breaks into some of the norms that manufacturers have been doing for years, which you've probably experienced. Everything was about lean.
Sure.
Lean manufacturing.
Right. Just in time.
Just
Yes.
in time, lean.
Yes.
Whereas now you're still holding on to those principles, and certain companies are holding on to those principles, but realizing, well, maybe there's a balance that I can have here.
Sure.
That we don't need to go back to those days of having massive safety stock or buffer stock, but you do need to maybe just open that lean manufacturing principles just a little bit.
Right. And when you spoke about counterfeit, a lot of companies that, especially, in New Hampshire, are companies that are either ISO or AS 9100, and we have an obligation to be checking for counterfeit parts, counterfeit material. We have to answer those questions in our audits, showing how we make sure that we're not using parts that are part of any type of counterfeit.
Especially in the medical field.
Absolutely,
you have
in
zero
aerospace.
tolerance
Zero
in
tolerance,
aerospace.
yes.
Zero tolerance in
Yeah.
those spaces.
So that's a really important part to remember when you're looking for alternate sources for supplies.
Especially when that desperation comes into play, and
Right.
you've got whether it's shareholders cracking down on you to say, hey, we've got to get this, or CEOs, and you've got C-suite coming
Right.
down. It's extremely important that you don't lose sight of that quality factor where you are now looking at those alternative sources, but the internet can be
Right.
very wild, and
Tricky.
those individuals that will pay for top line, you're calling them, sure, we can deliver 10,000 of this part that's nowhere to be found. Those are sometimes signs.
Right.
So it's ideal to have a partner or multiple partners or that will protect you from those types of things that like you said are ISO or AS ASA is. I mean, it goes beyond saying the importance.
Right. And then another big factor that the supply chain disruption we've seen and had to deal with, like everyone else, is of course the labor shortage, but also now labor negotiations. We've had to look at the way we negotiate someone's salary or trying to hire someone new, and really these negotiations have changed. We see it even just with something as like Starbucks now that there have been some calls for unions in Starbucks. Employees now are seeing that they are in an advantageous situation where they can demand more than they have in the past. And we always have prided ourselves on being a great place to work and being a family-owned business, a family-friendly place to work. But we really had to take a good look at ourselves and make sure we were being flexible enough, make sure our wages were competitive, and then try to find some space that, it's not like every company just has money to throw at wages. You have to really figure out, who you need and what you need them to accomplish, and what time frame you need them to accomplish the task in, and just be more flexible with them. So we've had to do a lot of work around that. Also, more incentivizing than we ever have before. Figuring out ways figuring out what's important to our employees, and then ways that we can incentivize what's important to them, whether it's bonuses or some type of award or reward, and it's really been something that we've worked at over the past 2 years, and more benefits. We've looked at our benefits package and said, how can we make this more robust, so that our employees want to come to work, especially where everybody else, they might have spouses or family members that are staying home while we're in manufacturing and we're showing up every day.
Absolutely.
And we need everybody to show up. We're not at the point now where we can manufacture from home either, just like you can't 3D print those semiconductors.
And the labor shortage, I think, everyone can relate to right now. Whether you are in the workforce and you're looking for more, looking for work, looking to improve, or as you mentioned, right, have an advancement, or they have the leverage. That's where that leverage is. So we obviously are feeling those same restraints and difficulties finding those resources to be able to support the business, as every company is. Everyone that's
Right.
probably listening to this is feeling that same ability, whether they're the ones doing triple the work to cover for the pieces that they can't find, or they're out looking for and trying to hire and have that staff with
Right.
them. Part of that, obviously, like you said, is one of the major disruptions, and that's across the board that the labor shortage has caused, whether
Right.
it was due to the ports, due to the freight providers that are driving the trucks, whether it was the individuals working at Starbucks, the barista behind the counter,
Sure.
right? There's only a certain number of people, and I'm sure everyone has asked that question to themselves that are in this space. Well, where is everyone?
Right.
Where did everyone go? Well, after the pandemic, it did open up certain other jobs that they then left those jobs and went to, let's say, better jobs or better
Sure.
paying jobs where people are constantly, improving on those benefit packages to
Right.
bring in those individuals. Some of the things that we've had to work on is with our clients is developing technology, better technology that would, you don't ever necessarily want to say, hey, replace the human, but people have been, especially in my business with distribution, a lot more robotics, a lot more
Sure.
automated, and that'll support and help with that labor shortage. So I think there's going to be more development of that, more ability for them to maybe not necessarily have a hands-on worker like like we would have, where you fork truck drivers or pickers and order pickers along those lines. You're now having the robots heading to
Right.
them. So
And one thing that we have looked at with automation is not so much to be replacing an employee, but to enhance their experience, and to be able to say, well, if we put this kind of automation in, maybe you get to move to an inspector position, or maybe you get to, just not be lifting those parts or those boxes or whatever it might be. So we're looking at more and more automation, but it doesn't mean that we're there yet. We have a long way to go, because that wasn't a top priority before the pandemic, but you can see now the benefits of having more skilled workers, and then the actual physical labor, hopefully being done by some type of machinery, where you are making the employee have a more positive experience at work, where they're
absolutely right. And that can include software. It's not
Sure.
just the physical aspect of the
Right.
job. It's the
Yes.
software that could help more efficient, where less data, less, a little bit more work that the work is doing for you.
Sure.
Or the software is doing for you to,
Yeah,
you know.
even recording data points for us, as opposed to an employee having to do a task and then go back and record data points. We're trying,
Exactly right.
having machinery record the data points.
That's
So
right.
working on things like that, and trying to, really enhance that experience.
Agreed.
Another thing that we've seen is, just kind of that ripple effect of the COVID and what has happened. People staying at home, working from home, and then the whole Great Resignation. But really, I think that it's important to note that this is probably something that was going to happen. It's really just been condensed into, what might have taken 10 years or 12 years has been condensed into a 2-year period.
It certainly
And,
has.
we were probably all working towards this, just like we're having this meeting on Zoom. There's probably going to be more of this. COVID just kind of, that ripple effect kind of pushed it along a lot quicker. And now, here we are having to kind of catch up, as opposed to when something rolls out, in a more orderly fashion, we all have time to adjust.
React a little bit
Yeah.
differently than to,
Sure.
or even be proactive, right? That's what we're,
Right.
somewhat talking about as well.
Yeah. And then I think that, we talked about the semiconductor shortage. One thing that we've been hearing is, with what's coming out of the Ukraine-Russia situation, is that even just trying to make semiconductors, all the issues that we've known about for the past 2 years, now that even talking about moving some of the production to the U.S., one of the big things is neon and not being able to get neon out of Ukraine. And well, why do you need neon? It's a gas that you need for the lasers to operate to make
For the machinery, right?
yes,
For the
to etch
semiconductor
into
machinery,
yeah.
exactly.
So this ripple effect just kind of goes on and on, but definitely we have not heard the end of the semiconductor shortage, and I think that that's going to be a big pain point going forward. I don't think we're going to solve that one very easily.
Yeah, from my understanding, everything that we're seeing is, you're looking at least through 2022 still. And as you mentioned, it's not just making the semiconductors or having enough of the semiconductors. It's the materials that are needed to make those semiconductors. Or the materials used to make the machines that make the semiconductors.
Right.
So everything you're saying as far as the ripple effect, that's exactly what that means. It's just this caused this to then, as it ripples to the next step down there. Semiconductor shortages have been something that's been it's not new. It's certainly not new to the supply chain. It's just not in this extent of,
Right.
of the supply chain that we've seen, at least since I've been doing this for 20 plus years. This is the longest and most wide range of
Sure.
semiconductors. Typically, you'll see it along whether it was a capacitor shortage in late 90s into early 2000. We recently had some again aluminum kind of products with resistors that were starting to, you would see some short, but nothing wide range that you're seeing today.
Yeah. I think that, like I said, we're going to be hearing about it for a long time.
Yes.
And then hopefully the port situations, I know that didn't hear too much about it, the actual speech today, but President Biden was in Portsmouth speaking about the port there and hoping to ease some of the pain points there. But we actually had some machinery that was stuck in a port in Long Beach, so we actually felt it firsthand. And
Yes.
it was one of those things that when it was first being said, people at my place of employment didn't believe that it could possibly be on one of those cargo ships. But those cargo ships hold a lot. When you actually look at the tonnage that comes through there, it in fact was our machinery that was there that held up us with a really big new customer going into something that's a little bit different than we were doing before. So we didn't have a lot of experience in what our customer was asking us to do, but we felt very confident that this is something that's in our wheelhouse and we can certainly master it. But it was really tricky when we just couldn't get the equipment to start up. And at some points it got a little bit sticky when we kept saying it's coming, and
And the costs that were
Sure.
accumulating for you,
yes,
not just from the, it started, as you mentioned, the ripple effect. It started with the boats, right? First coming out, right? There was a shortage of getting material done due to the pandemic. And then once they hit the ships, they moved on.
Right.
Well, then there was a shortage of workforce, whatnot, that were
Right.
able to unload those
Yes.
trailers. Then it turned to, okay, now there's freight forwarder issues. We can't get a truck or individuals to get there.
right,
And then people were paying drayage charges that was sitting on the dock for so long because you couldn't get somebody there. So it was all those issues that
Right.
you're saying that's I think everyone's felt as part of this.
yeah. And when it actually hits home, it definitely feels a little bit different than when you see it on the news and you hear about a cargo ship getting stuck or dock workers going on strike or not enough containers, empty containers to
Go to grab some Gatorade from your local store and the shelf is empty.
and then you
Then you
feel
feel
it,
it. Then you
right?
feel
Yeah. So that was just real, really kind of hit home. And as far as Russia invading Ukraine and really kind of seeing for in the metal finishing industry really having been hit hard recently has been eye-opening. In the metal finishing industry, part of my trade association, we talk a lot about critical minerals because you need certain minerals to be able to make the aluminum, to be able to make the steel. And so there's been a close eye on all these critical minerals. Well, with Russia and Ukraine, where so many minerals, there's so much mining. There's a huge threat to that supply chain and what that reaction is going to be. One thing that happened, another kind of personal anecdote, is when the invasion started, the price of nickel, which is used, for lots of metal production, but also it's a metal coating that the metal finishing industry often uses. It's very common. It's one of the more common metal finishing applications. Well, the price of nickel shot up 240% in one day. And it had been very stable over the 40 years that it was traded on the London Metals Exchange, where they actually had to shut down the exchange over it. It's since stabilized a little bit out, but we had customers panicking over this because they, didn't know where they were going to go for metal finishing. Who was going to be able to afford this? Where it's a relatively economical finish, it suddenly became, a precious metals.
Right.
And hopefully that, that price will continue to stabilize more, but just the unknowns of what can and can't happen. And the same with food and grains. I focus a lot on metals because that's what I know, but you hear about all the grains and all the fertilizer that comes from the Ukraine and what comes out of, Russia and now China. I know
That's
that
right.
there's some big issues there. So.
Absolutely right. And as you mentioned, due to the invasion and now the oil price, right?
Sure.
has gone through. So again, that same type of another disruption that's added to the level of other disruptions that we had within the supply chain, right? And it was interesting. I believe I did learn that same issue of Ukraine, which was eye-opening to me, was the amount of, whether it was wheat that came from the Ukraine, that their soil is extremely rich for that food.
Right, and I guess there've been farmers for
for
centuries
rice, and China's
centuries,
having exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and what do you think is going to happen with the oil? What's your prediction?
That's one of those. Obviously we don't move much oil, right, as part of our type of thing, but you've seen that obviously President Biden is now releasing 1 million gallons per day out of the Federal Reserve, the largest from there. I'm hopeful that they'll continue with whether it's renewable type energies that they're moving towards, but again, that opens up other issues that you're seeing with all the EV type, going that direction, which I think we certainly need to, but that brings its other levels of challenges there.
Sure.
So, what the right answer is, I don't know, or even to speculate, what would happen from the oil. I think you may see some change, but obviously, I don't know the exact percentage of oil that came from Russia, for us.
Right.
But until this conflict is resolved, then I think we're in the same issues that we're seeing today.
Okay. And then I think that I can speak a little bit about what AeroDynamics has done as far as trying to be resilient or pivot during the pandemic, and then I think maybe you could speak a little bit about some more global ideas. These are just
some of the services and solutions
Sure.
that we've tried to instill. Absolutely.
That would be great.
Absolutely.
So one thing that I did was I just got busy. I was at work every day, so I got busy thinking of ways that I could, number one, engage with other people who were dealing with the same situation. So I ended up launching the Women in Manufacturing Northern New England chapter during this time. It was something that was in the works anyways, but it really, it just seemed like the right time, even though we couldn't meet in person. We were planning an event for the summer of 2020, and we just decided to do a virtual event in the late spring of 2020, and it seemed like the right time. Everybody that I knew that wanted to be part of it just needed a place to kind of go and see what other people were doing, especially where women owned companies were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. So it wasn't the launch that we were planning on. We were planning on a big gala, inaugural event, but it was, also just, it seemed like the right time. Another thing that we did was we started a new company called Revolution Scientific, and we actually started that at the height of the pandemic. And this was something that was in development for a really long time, and we had gotten most of our certifications that we needed, including AS 9100, to be able to open the door. But when the pandemic happened, we were missing our business license, and the town hall was shut down, and what were we going to do? So for the first 2 or 3 weeks of the pandemic, we decided, well, we just can't do anything. But we also had customers, and some of these customers were serving the medical community, and they were asking us, when we were going to open. So we took the bold step of tracking down the town manager and asking him if there is any way we could get an emergency license. And so we literally cut ribbon on the building and got our first PO in April of 2020. So it was a little bit of a bold move, but it also felt like there was a glimmer of hope for us in the middle of that initial firestorm of the pandemic. So Revolution Scientific got also a slower, less elaborate start, but we felt like it was an important thing to do. Something else we did is we just have done a risk analysis, good training from our AS 9100, our ISO certification on, where are we, in danger of having some issues. So looking at our inventory and also having a really close control over it, having extra supplies on hand, figuring out how to have some redundancy in our suppliers, but also staying committed to our suppliers, because to jump ship over getting something a day or two quicker, then you're kind of left out on the lurch if you are just going for the quicker delivery or the better deal. Kind of like with any, if you're dealing with supplies, if you're always just jumping for the better deal, in the end, when you're in a situation like this, where are you going to be left? So
absolutely. One of the things that I mentioned, or was going to mention too, and you're saying the exact same thing, is collaboration is even more important now with your suppliers.
Sure.
We're all feeling it. So
right.
to kind of put the screws to them, as they say, really isn't going to help you get to the solution and what you have to get
very
to.
Short-sighted,
very
right?
short-sighted.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Those days may come back where you can then get back to the days of sitting across and negotiating the pricing.
Sure.
But right now, I think what's most important is working together and finding those solutions
right.
for that.
Yeah, definitely having some empathy, and that has, I think, served us well. Definitely I kept current with not just the COVID situation, which, having a nursing background, I was, I still follow the New York Times COVID maps and charts and study them like it's nobody's business. Now it's just a little bit of an obsession, but I kind of track the patterns. But also other current events. You can, like the ports or shortages, or
Absolutely.
What's happening in Shanghai, those kind of things, or the lockdowns right now. But one of the other things we did was we really tried to upskill our employees that we had and make sure that we have depth charts is what we really worked on. How many people could do each skill in the building, and if there were areas where it was only 1 or 2 people, made sure that we, added a third or fourth in line of who could do that skill in case we did have an outbreak, or in case people decided that they thought they might seek a greener pasture for themselves, whether it's moving closer to home or whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
So
right. The business
that was
continuity
important.
piece has been, right, you mentioned risk management, risk
Sure.
analysis. Every company has started to, and if they haven't, they should be, is looking at that business continuity. And that includes, your internal with your employees. If that, especially during the COVID outbreak, if this individual or these individuals have to shut down, what is it? How are we going to continue
Right.
to operate? Who else can run that machine, or who else can, understands this particular project, or who else can support that customer? All those things have come into play, right?
Sure.
To review and go back to your business continuity, right?
Right.
There's certainly companies that have people that focus strictly on that, but there's so many companies that don't, right? They have their business continuity, or maybe it comes up in a case where a client asks you for your business continuity plan,
right.
and you go and, oh well, yeah, I
Yes,
absolutely
yeah.
have that, absolutely, and you send it, and then you realize there's the gaps in that business continuity.
Sure.
So that has been also something that we've provided or have brought as a potential recommendations for everyone to review. But the risk analysis and even before the pandemic, which you may have seen, risk management was a buzz, was
Sure.
a buzzword out there. So
Yeah.
I think people started to see that there was, some, let's just say, cracks. No one predicted what we are today,
Sure.
but certainly started to see that prior to that. So I think that there was an emphasis on that already, and this just really put it to the forefront and priority and fast tracked it to
Right.
where you're now doing full risk management along
Yeah.
those lines of all these disruptions you've talked about today.
Right.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing that we did is just kind of took a look at our relationships that we had, and then really tried to leverage them. And I won't go through all the different organizations that I leaned on, but people really came through, for us. And I think it's important that, if you're in a situation, to look at who might be someone to use as a liaison. It might not always be really clear at first what someone, what the benefit is, but people like New Hampshire Manufacturing Extension Program, they have grants they can offer. They can help people through different types of situations, whether it's education or, different supply chain issues. We've secured some grants with them. In fact, we're pursuing getting our medical accreditation, which is an ISO accreditation for medical, because we have seen that there is business for us. We've always worked on medical parts, but we haven't. It hasn't been, one of our core competencies, and now we're looking to really explore that a little bit more, which is also, kind of near and dear to my heart. But New Hampshire Manufacturing Extension is able to help me secure a grant to get training on that. So
That's great.
that's really cool. They have federal money, and some of that money is used, for pandemic relief. So partnering with community college is important. With taking classes through Great Bay, and you can get some really great deals there. And then, the list kind of goes on, but NADAC is one that we've been part of, which is another kind of local New Hampshire Aerospace and Defense Export Consortium. But I think that, everybody kind of needs to take a look at who's around them and who can possibly help them. But trade associations are really important. And I think that sometimes you think, oh, I don't want to talk to my competitors. Well, that's where you're going to really,
Absolutely.
if you can develop those relationships, that's where you're really going to start to shine and grow, I think.
I agree, and that's some of the things as well. I mean, it's just great topics that you're mentioning. Is that, that those relationships that you build now will support you
Sure.
moving forward from there.
Right.
So as you mentioned, even calling your competitors, we've partnered with more other companies that say offer not necessarily everything that SVT offers, but offers one particular section of what
Sure.
we offer, whether it's transportation companies, and we've called each other and said, hey, listen, I have a client that needs some extra space here to hold on
Right.
to some inventory. Do you have some there that we could then work and we're now collaborating through
Where
to
it
help
probably
find
feels a little counterintuitive, right? Where,
Correct. Well, now, hey, all right,
now they know
sign this
this.
NDA,
Yes,
and
right.
you're doing those kind of things. But at the end of the day, you want to keep things moving. You want to help support
Right.
those clients. So you're branching out and finding those things. So
Right.
I highly recommend all companies that we talk with is really reach out to those vendors,
Right.
reach out to those suppliers, reach out to your contract manufacturers,
Yeah.
reach out to your 3PL providers. A lot of the things that we talked about from a resiliency standpoint, you're seeing people now, as I think you had mentioned earlier, onshoring or nearshoring. You're seeing diversification where for years it was the model was centralization, right? It was efficient. Again, it was lean. Now you're seeing, well, maybe I should have other locations spread out a little bit, so I'm not so risk, right? You know, and that provides you to be a little bit more risk averse to that type of thing. So, but sometimes the client that you might have been working with, well, you know, hey, I opened up this 400,000 square foot facility for you. What do you mean you want to switch to? You know, and depending on who you're working with, maybe it's a smaller 3PL, and they may not have that, you know, additional support or locations to be able to support you out of. Therefore, having as you mentioned, whether it's calling a competitor, so to speak, or just calling another company that you may have worked with and say, hey, can you help us out? I need a customer that's, you know, and that could build something that you might not even thought of, you know, along the way, or they might be able to support something along those. So, absolutely.
And then one other thing that we did a lot of, especially in the beginning, but the transparency with our customers has definitely become more opaque, and we have conversations that we might not have ever had with customers, because you want to appear one way, and especially in small business. I don't know exactly how small your company is, but depending on the day, some days we want to be a mom and pop, and other days we want to be a mighty aerospace manufacturer.
It's interesting you say that. Same thing. So we have those same conversations where we're large enough to manage what you need us to manage.
Sure.
But we're small enough to be flexible and be able to, move when you need us to move and shift when you need us to shift. So same conversations.
And so we've had transparency with our customers. We had some customers, billion-dollar customers who were in the commercial aerospace where, they were in a tough bind for a long time and still, they're kind of crawling out of it. But commercial aerospace really took a hit, and to have to kind of help them and support them as they pivoted and maybe branched more into maybe military contracts or other ways for them to stay afloat. We had some real heart-to-hearts with some of those people, and what did they need from us, and what could we do, and so we didn't want to just make it all about our suppliers. We'd really kind of listen to our customers, but also for us to plan ahead, to know, to really be able to do some forecasting, to know that they're hearing that, oh, this, we're not going to recover, it's not going to be Q3 like we said of 2021. Now we're moving into 2022, so
it just inches along a little bit more as we go.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And just us as a small company, just trying to have a diverse portfolio of customers. Customers not all doing the same thing, and we've always tried to do that. But even as you would think, oh, commercial aerospace, that is just about as solid as you're going to get.
Right.
And just that not being true.
You mentioned earlier, medical companies and the struggles that they had, and I have a small anecdote as well of a situation that we had come across, and it's one of the topics as far as resiliency goes that isn't necessary. Everyone will understand it when I mention it, but don't understand everything that goes along with it as well, which is the reverse logistics piece of building up, and some of the key words that you're starting to see in the industry now is circular economy, right? Which is really looking at even at the development phase, what can be reused, everything that we want to keep out of a landfill. And what's interesting is now that these shortages have come, companies are starting to realize maybe their reverse logistics, they need to take a harder look at that. Are there materials that they could pull back that they could then harvest to reuse in some of their new products, right? Things along those lines. And one of the story I was going to tell is it was a medical company that we were working with, and they had called us up, and they needed a 3x5, 3.5-inch screen.
Okay.
Couldn't find them anywhere. Well, we just happen to have 10,000 of them sitting in our stock that were older day code for it, and I don't need to get into day code for everybody here, but for those that understand it, so it was an older day code, and it also had a particular custom part that was to this. So through the work of one of our account managers, they had gone in because the part number was a little bit different, but they realized, okay, I know what the main screen is. We have, 10,000 of these in our stock. So we ended up having to provide them one of the samples, and they were able to realize that they could pull the extra part off, and the part was what they needed. So we were able to support them through one of those types of things.
Wow.
So it's important and that was through a prior reverse logistic program that I had, which I should have said. So that material came in from another client that, well, they're no longer using the 3.5, they had moved to something else. And we were holding on to them, whether it was for repairs for them, but we were then able to go to our client that owned that inventory that we were holding, say, hey, listen, we have a customer that needs 10,000 of these. Are you okay? And they were like, absolutely.
Wow.
We no longer need that. So it's something another, that we recommend to clients, that we go in and say, really take a look at your whole supply chain.
Sure.
Take a look at what's in the market. Do you have a view of what's coming back that you might be able to help support those, whether it is bringing it even down to the precious metal.
Right.
You finding a recycle company that then can get you that, whether it's the nickel or something along those lines, to then use in the
and like you said, keep it out of the landfill.
Keep it out of the landfill.
Yeah.
Sustainability, right? That's been
Sure.
something also that's a key buzzword.
And I wonder, that story that you told, would your customer have taken those before? Would they have been?
Absolutely
Taken-
not.
Right.
Absolutely not. So the
So
date
sort of
code would have
standard-
tossed them off.
right.
They would have looked at the cost of having to retrofit that back up and having to take the product off. But because of where we are now, they were a little more open to the suggestion of,
Yeah.
well, take a look at them, send them through your engineering, because they knew they weren't going to get it.
Right.
The development of the new product, let's say, that's no longer using that, they couldn't do it, so they had to support this legacy product. Therefore, it opened up the door, and
So interesting,
Yes.
that our standards can change like that, when they
Yes.
were probably all along perfectly
all
good.
tight, yes,
Right.
yes, 18 months or
Sure.
less, and yes, along those lines. So
And one other thing that I've had experience doing during the pandemic is just being more vocal in the political landscape, and certainly not in a partisan way at all, but being open to having visitors in the building. We were lucky enough to have the Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, into our building, and it was one of our first 2 or 3 visits. She came last April of 2021 with Senator Shaheen, and it was great to hear their take on supply chain issues and what we're doing, and bringing manufacturing back, a little bit more of that onshoring. And Secretary Raimondo, actually, her dad had worked in metal finishing at the Bolivar watch factory back in the 70s, so she was familiar with what we did. And Senator Shaheen's on the Armed Forces Committee, so she had an interest in what we did. And I think that it's important for companies to not be afraid to speak to their representatives, to be a champion for what they do, and
absolutely,
speak about what they do. So
absolutely agree. Yeah.
yeah.
If you have, or even just to reach out to them and let them know, whether it is local to us, right? You've seen Governor Sununu going around to different places.
Sure.
Hearing what the issues are that they're having, because I'm sure
Right.
they're hearing it, I'm sure they're seeing it.
Right.
And so the more potentially that they could have a better understanding of truly what everyone's feeling about
Right.
the businesses.
And our employees, just felt so appreciated, being able to show their craft to
Exactly.
people,
That's
what
right.
we do, on a day-to-day basis, what they're out there doing. So,
Right.
I think that's important to also, be able to talk to your local officials about your pain points and ways that you can, potentially, work on them.
It's together, right?
Yeah.
Get the
Yeah.
support from them. Yeah, agreed.
So what other kind of tips do you have?
Well, there's, I'd love to be able to sit here and say I have a, crystal ball that I'm able to, or support everyone, with their issues out there. Some of the ones we've already talked about, whether it's looking at other alternative supply.
Sure.
You know, that is a big one. And we don't just mean, hey, go out to the open market, as they would say, but, you know, finding those things ahead of time. Can you replace the wooden part with another piece? Can it be a plastic piece? Can it be, you know, are there, you know, really take a look at, don't just kind of, or in the line of my story of, don't necessarily stick to the parameters that you do have. You know, if everything was handled correctly on those parts, and you're going through, and the supplier has testing capabilities, be open to those types of things to be able to support and get that product out for you. As I mentioned, the reverse logistics has been the biggest one. That's probably been one of the larger areas that we've been able to support, and then we've recommended to clients is re-look back into your supply chain. Go back to those contract manufacturers, retake a look at your part numbers and see if they do cross somewhere from this product to this product. A lot of companies work with just their internal numbers, and one internal number could have been different because it was, you know, lead-free or RoHS, but they changed it here, but this part was always made RoHS, you know, or lead-free. Really just dig in a little bit more to see if maybe you can support yourself internally. We are recommending that people have, and I mentioned this earlier, have a little bit more buffer stock, have a little bit more safety stock, plan that, maybe not be as lean. We are seeing a lot of, as far as even the freight and transportation, some of the solutions that we've been able to provide is having local short-term locations that they can at least get it out of the dock and get it out of that area, so you're not paying those exorbitant fees that you see from the drayage or holding it there, you know, per day. Move it to a more cost-friendly location that will then allow you to just get your head about you and supply that over there. Of course, people are also looking at, we mentioned a couple of times, the onshoring and nearshoring, right? That is a strategy that's coming on. People are looking at the cost of, okay, the labor costs. The labor costs in China are creeping up as well.
Right.
So now companies are looking at, you know, we're not even saying U.S., that'd be great, but you're looking at Mexico as well.
Right.
Mexico has been there, North America, correct. And there's a little bit, you know, if you're taking the cost, especially right now, the cost of containers, which have tripled. You have this, and which is caused by multiple things, right? Large companies are, well, I'll just rent the whole ship. You know, I'll just pay for the whole ship. They have that ability. Smaller companies, mid-sized companies don't have those capabilities. So you need to have maybe multiple. A lot of people had routing guides and they stuck with their specific things, and not to break away, because we just said collaborate with them, be open with them, work with your suppliers, but at the same time, explore. You know, we've had to take a look at where, let's say, one particular used a company for all their containers. Well, and they would typically grab full containers. Well, can we break up that shipment? You know, there might be pockets within other containers that are going out that we would, you know, that you can look and say, can I get 5 of my pallets on here? Can I get 6 of my pallets onto this one? So it's really just taking a look at all these different thoughts and ideas to it to help support those along the way within the supply chain. So, I mean, there's each customer that comes through our, you know, doors or calls us or emails us. Everyone's feeling the same pain, but they're not alike. Each one is a little bit different, so it's important to kind of take a look and understand the whole picture of, all right, what is it what's your main pain point today? What can we support you with and try to help you with? And so those are some of the things that we've been supporting with, that we would recommend for tips to have that resiliency through this. And we've talked about so many of them: the technology, improving your technology, looking at spreading out, where your material is being supported from. A lot of companies are doing that. You see some of the large retail companies that are now using their stores as distribution lines, right? That was something that came out of that that I think is great, right? You may start to see where maybe the local large retailers are smaller footprint, but you might have a couple of more, I don't want to say kiosk type, but do you need that size? Or they're using them as distributions for that last mile trips. Those are some of the, again, without knowing specifics, but those are the kind of the main strategies that we try to look at when we help with companies to build a better supply chain resiliency throughout the whole their whole supply chain.
Sure. Great.
Okay, thank you for that. That was amazing. I feel like my head is a supply chain in and of itself, where there's plenty of warehouse space, but not enough trucks to get all the questions out
There's
there.
also a shortage of warehouse space too.
There is.
There is capacity issues.
Yeah. So we've been getting a lot of great questions here online. One of the things that I think our audiences are particularly interested in, you see what's going on in Ukraine, obviously a lot of concern about semiconductors and how reliant we are on Taiwan production for that. So a lot of these global issues can have local impacts for local businesses. So can you guys talk a little bit in the final couple minutes here about how you do or do not follow global events in order to have a better sense of what challenges might be coming down the pike for you?
I can jump in on this one if
you probably this is your career.
I was going to say, I mean, that's absolutely something that we watch and follow very tightly. Especially as you mentioned, one of the things is our with Taiwan, right? So you're starting to see some of the companies, whether it's Intel or Qualcomm, that are starting to look at, okay, Intel just, I think it was X amount of billions of dollars that they're looking to have a new factory here for that, but that's not going to happen tomorrow, right? So I think this has really put a spotlight on that that we had such a tie to Taiwan. It was, I think, something close to 90% of all semiconductors, at least the wafers and whatnot that were coming from Taiwan, right? Really controlled that market, and so certainly you need to see that needed to be broken from them. But watching global events, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be something along these lines. It could be a typhoon that came across in this one area, or it could be, you know, anything along weather related.
Sure.
All things that we are monitoring to see what that, as you mentioned, what that ripple effect will be, and how can we support that. Like, let's get that out there, everyone. We've seen this is happening. So, and we try to provide that information once it comes across our desk as well, of what we see, and hey, this is what you can do, or or at least just share the information so other people in the supply chain industry can prepare for that.
And I think it's great that you're letting your letting your customers in on this, because
Absolutely.
it's probably not something that a lot of business owners thought of pre-pandemic. You know, you kind of had the issues separated a little bit, or you thought the ripple effect wouldn't be so direct towards you. You know, it might take a long time to affect you, and now that window is smaller and important for all
And
businesses.
how it could affect them.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, you can certainly send them our way to some of these great
That's right.
discussions about top global issues.
Sure.
But I think final question for you guys today. It's been a really great discussion. Can you I know there are a lot of complex solutions that are out there, a lot of long-term solutions, but of course we are in the Amazon Prime world that we live in today of instant gratification. I want it in 2 hours or less. So what are some of the short-term solutions that we can look to alleviate some of these issues and hopefully not have some of the shortages that we've seen driven by the pandemic, but really compounded by the pandemic, as these are long-term issues?
Absolutely. I'll jump in too, if
Absolutely.
that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So, again, there's certain things that I touched upon earlier of some of the short-term things that can be done. And it depends on if the question is coming from, let's say, the consumer, or let's say the manufacturer or the company that's working, right? So I think there's two different answers that potentially. As far as the consumer, I think there's some expectations that could be shifted slightly, as Tim mentioned, right? Does that need to be 2 hours for me, or is it still possible that this will work for me within 2 days? So maybe
Sure.
even, find a way to, even forecasting your own internal household of, hey, I'm going to need that milk for this week, and are there any, maybe I should get it. And I know, even I'm sure all of us have talked and have started to do this. So those are something from the consumer side, but from a supplier and or manufacturer or company that's supporting these goods, it's a lot of what I talked about. It's looking at what are some of those solutions out there that you can do. Are there parameters that you might be able to reach a little bit? And you've seen some aspects where they've changed some things, where I think GM mentioned they're no longer offering heated seats, right? So that's one of the things that you could look at and just say, are there value adds that we're putting onto our product that, hey, we can still get our product out there, but maybe this necessarily part of it isn't going to be in that.
Sure.
Or maybe there's shipments that can go out and, hey, we're going to send this along, once it becomes available, things along those lines. So it's difficult to provide a short-term solution, based on that, without understanding the full thing. But I would my recommendation for short-term would be, I don't see a short-term change to the shortage market, let's say for semiconductors. I don't see a short-term change in whether it's oil prices
Sure.
or the labor force. I think all those things are going to have to work themselves out. But as we mentioned earlier, are there areas that you could have additional training for the employees that you do have to help with some of those issues that you're seeing? If it isn't a labor issue, if it's a labor issue, are there things that you can maybe knock out that maybe, and I'll use my own types of thoughts. Cycle counting. Can you change the cycle counting factor where maybe you had 2 or 3 individuals that were fully cycle counting? Can you move that? Is there weekend work that could be done? So really just take a hard look at some of the things, and just things that may not have been an idea that you would have had, open it up. Or I would say to staffers that have ideas that maybe didn't bring them up, I would certainly recommend that you do bring those up to your managers or the executives, and just offer those ideas to them, because
It's a really good point.
they may have not have even thought of it because their mind's off in a million other different things. So if you have ideas or thoughts of, hey, we can streamline this and we'd be able to do this, or I can, I was able to find this supply, I would say certainly voice it and bring it to their attention.
Great advice.
Yeah, and I think the diversity of thought and diversity of perspective is a highly valuable asset that may not get used quite as much as we would always like to see. So I think I'm going to try and squeeze in one more final question here. And this really is something that we were talking about before we went live, is, obviously with these supply chain issues and these various factors that are making it more and more difficult to do business today, what does that mean for both of your companies in terms of your future planning, your future growth, and the economic potential for the state of New Hampshire?
Great question.
I'll let you lead.
I'll lead on that one. So obviously, and Tim, you mentioned, we touched upon it a little bit before, this started, was how this has truly affected, our business. I made a slight joke that I didn't have as much gray hair prior to, this, but it has obviously opened the door to substantial growth from an SVT standpoint, which is, again, you have your good and your bad to every situation. So in this particular situation, it really fell into everything that we do offer, and really and there's been other things that have come along that we didn't necessarily offer. And it was where a client had come to us with a particular, let's say, just issue or that they were struggling with, and we then adopted it, and said, well, we'll go ahead and we can offer that, we can support that. So it has had a benefit to SVT in general, because it really is our world. This is what we are in each day, and we touch upon, within supporting the full supply chain, we've really touched upon all of these things that are mentioned, even from a resiliency standpoint or the disruptions that you're seeing. So, I had mentioned earlier that it just really was everything that came all together. And so as far as, the state of New Hampshire, we're coming up on our 25th year anniversary is this year. So we've been in business for quite a while, and obviously continue to our growth here in New Hampshire, as well as our locations that we are expanding throughout the U.S. as well as and global.
And I just, would say that New Hampshire is such a great place to be a small business. I think I touched before on, using lots of different, agencies and nonprofits and, trade associations as support. But we have also thrived in New Hampshire for two and a half plus decades, and see New Hampshire as a collaborative kind of place to do business. But what we're also seeing with NADAC, the New Hampshire Aerospace and Defense Consortium, we're trying to figure out, and we've applied for a grant. I'm part of that association, trying to find a supply chain that isn't quite as difficult to navigate through, to find the work. If you offer certain services, should big companies or even other small companies be going across the country to get goods and services? So we've applied for a grant to work on software solutions, training, and also initiatives to get the word out of what New Hampshire even has to offer. So I think by getting involved, not just focusing so much on yourself, but kind of being open to the whole welfare of business in New Hampshire and beyond. I think that really helps. That's part of the solution for us anyways.
Yeah, and I think that's one theme that has really come out through the various programs we've been doing this spring on international business here in the state, is the wonderful support that people get in the community with the various organizations, Cara, that you've mentioned. And I think it's so great that we have this tight-knit community that's really willing to help each other out, particularly when we are all facing similar struggles today. So thank you all for joining us here tonight. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you to Cara and Brendan for joining us and providing their insights into this very complex and interesting issue. I think we really learned a lot from them tonight. I really enjoyed the local perspective and some of the insights that we haven't seen in some of the other conversations we've had so far. I want to thank everyone for joining us. If you're watching live, thank you so much. If you're watching the recording, we appreciate it. Sorry we didn't get to more questions, but I think it was a really interesting conversation to be had. Our next event is going to be another virtual program with Mark Lagon. He is going to be talking about global health and how to respond to pandemics such as COVID or AIDS or tuberculosis. Lots of fun things to discuss there, and how do we prevent the next pandemic so that we don't end up back where we were 2 years ago or even 2 months ago. So thank you again. We look forward to seeing you all on May 5th at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Have a wonderful evening and good night.